Welcome. It is time to rest and time to drift back into the past. Close your eyes if you like. Breathe slowly and let your body sink into comfort. Tonight, we will wander through the ancient Roman world. Not to watch battles, not to hear speeches, but to explore kitchens, markets, and feasting halls. The Romans were known for their power, but they were also known for their food. They loved to eat. They loved to experiment. And sometimes, what they enjoyed may seem very strange to us today. We will not rush. We will move slowly, step by step, dish by dish. With each new taste, the past will open gently and calmly. And as you listen, your body will grow heavier. Your breathing will slow. Your thoughts will soften. The story of Roman food will become a soft dream. Section 1. The Roman love of food. The Romans built an empire that stretched across many lands. And with these lands came many flavors. Ships brought spices, oils, grains, and fruits from distant provinces. Markets in the city of Rome were full of goods from all over the world. You might see figs from Syria, wheat from Egypt, olive oil from Spain, wine from Gaul, and fish from the Mediterranean. The city was a crossroads of taste. Food was not just about survival. It was also about status. Wealthy Romans showed their power through feasts. A banquet was not only to feed the body, it was to impress, to entertain, and to surprise. Guests reclined on couches, leaning on cushions. Servants moved softly around the room. Platters of food were carried in. The air was heavy with the smell of roasted meat, honey, herbs, and smoke. At such feasts, the strange and unusual were welcomed. A guest might find peacock, parrot, or ostrich on the table. They might taste dormice stuffed with nuts and honey, or they might sip sauces made from fermented fish. The Romans valued bold flavors. They liked mixing sweet with sour, salt with spice. They used vinegar, honey, wine, pepper, and herbs in many dishes. To us, these combinations may seem unusual. To them, they were delightful. One of the most important tastes in Rome was garum. This was a sauce made from rotting fish. Small fish were layered with salt, left in the sun, and fermented for weeks. The liquid that rose to the top was strained and bottled. It smelled strong, sharp, and salty. Romans poured it on almost everything. Garum factories were found in coastal towns. Workers filled clay jars with fish and salt. The heat of the sun did the rest. The finished sauce was shipped across the empire, carried in clay amphorae, marked with painted labels. Today, the idea may seem unpleasant, but to Romans, garum was the taste of home. It was their ketchup, their soy sauce, their seasoning for all things. It flavored meat, vegetables, bread, even fruit. Another popular food was bread, but even bread was not plain. Romans liked to dip bread in oils and sauces. Sometimes they mixed it with cheese, honey, or garum. A simple loaf became a rich meal. Cookbooks from the time still survive. The most famous is by a man named Apicius. He lived in the 1st century. He wrote down recipes for the wealthy. They include roast boar, jelly made from fish, and sauces with wine and pepper. Apicius was said to be very rich. He spent much of his life seeking the finest food. It is told he once traveled far to buy fresh shrimp. When he discovered the catch had already been sold, he returned home, upset, and ended his life. Whether this story is true or not, it shows how serious food was to the Romans. Banquets lasted for hours. Guests ate many courses. First came eggs, olives, and salads. Then came meats, stews, and breads. Finally came fruits, nuts, and sweets with honey. Wine was poured throughout. At these feasts, conversation was as important as the food. But the food always amazed. It was colorful, flavored, and strange. Each dish was a surprise. Imagine sitting in a Roman dining room. The lamps flicker. The air is warm with the smell of sauces and herbs. You take a piece of bread. It is dipped in oil, sprinkled with cheese, and topped with garum. The taste is sharp, salty, and rich. This is the Roman way of eating. Not plain, not simple, but always bold, curious, and surprising. Section 2. Garum, the flavor of Rome. If there is one food that defines the Roman world, it is garum. This strong fish sauce was everywhere. Rich Romans ate it, poor Romans ate it. Soldiers, sailors, farmers, and even emperors all knew its taste. The process of making garum was not beautiful. Workers filled large stone or clay vats with layers of small fish, anchovies, sardines, mackerel, and sometimes scraps of larger fish. Between each layer, they poured salt. Then they left the vats in the sun. The hot air of the Mediterranean did the work. Slowly, over many weeks, the fish broke down. The flesh softened, the bones dissolved, and the oils rose. What had once been fresh fish turned into liquid gold. Not gold in color, but gold in value. When the time was right, workers drained the liquid. The clear, amber-colored sauce was called garum. The thicker paste that remained was called alec. Both were sold, though garum was prized. It was poured into jars, sealed with pitch, and shipped far and wide. Archaeologists have found garum factories in Spain, in Portugal, in North Africa, and in Italy. On the coast of Pompeii, near the Bay of Naples, entire workshops were built just for fish sauce. The smell must have been sharp, strong, almost overwhelming. But to Romans, this was the smell of business, the smell of wealth. Different grades of garum existed. The best was made with only the finest fish, carefully chosen and salted. It was smooth, clear, and expensive. The cheapest was made with scraps, bones, and guts. This darker sauce was for the poor, but even then it was loved. Roman writers spoke about garum often. Pliny the Elder, a great scholar, wrote about its trade. He said the most famous garum came from Spain. It was called garum sociorum, and it was sold for more than perfumes or precious wines. Imagine that for a moment. A sauce made from rotting fish was valued more highly than flowers or jewels. It may seem strange, but it shows the Roman taste. They craved intensity. They enjoyed sharp, salty, powerful flavors. Garum was used in almost every dish. It might be mixed with olive oil to make a salad dressing. It might be stirred into stews and soups. It might be poured over roasted meat or mixed with honey for desserts. There were recipes for garum with wine, garum with vinegar, garum with pepper. A cookbook by Apicius contains hundreds of mentions of garum. It is the foundation of Roman cooking. Without it, many dishes would not have the taste Romans loved. It was their secret ingredient, their kitchen treasure. The smell of garum must have filled Roman homes. Imagine a small kitchen in Pompeii. A clay pot bubbles on the fire. The stew inside is rich with beans, herbs, and meat. The cook lifts a small flask, tilts it gently, and a golden stream of garum pours in. The sharp, salty aroma rises at once. It mixes with the smell of herbs. It clings to the air. The whole room feels fuller, stronger, richer. And this was not only in grand villas. Even in simple apartments, in narrow streets, garum was used daily. A loaf of bread, a handful of olives, and a splash of garum could be a meal. Cheap, simple, yet satisfying. Some Romans even drank garum as medicine. It was believed to help digestion. It was thought to cure certain illnesses. Doctors mixed it with wine or herbs. In the Roman mind, garum was not only food, it was health. The trade of garum made many people rich. Merchants shipped it across the empire. Sailors loaded amphorae onto ships. The jars were heavy, the smell was strong, but the profit was great. In markets, sellers shouted its name. They promised purity, flavor, and strength. Each jar bore a mark, the name of the maker, and the grade of the sauce. Shoppers examined them carefully, like we examine bottles of wine today. Garum was not only about taste, it was about identity. To be Roman was to love garum. Foreigners sometimes mocked it, but Romans defended it proudly. Even when Rome fell, the memory of garum remained. Later, in the Middle Ages, people in Europe still made similar sauces. And today, in parts of the world, fish sauces are still used. In Vietnam, in Thailand, in the Philippines, in Korea. The taste of garum lives on. As you lie here, imagine the warmth of the Roman sun. The jars of clay stacked in rows. The air filled with the sea breeze, mixed with the scent of fermenting fish. It is strange, it is strong, and yet it is calm. This was the heart of Roman flavor. A sauce made from the sea, turned by time, carried by empire. Garum was not just food, it was Rome itself, in liquid form. And as the Romans poured it over their bread, their meats, their fruits, they smiled. Content, satisfied. To them, nothing was more Roman, nothing more delicious. And so we drift deeper, gently, into their world of strange foods. Section 3. The delicacy of dormice. Among all the unusual foods Romans enjoyed, few seem as curious as the dormouse. Today, we may think of mice as small, ordinary creatures. In Roman times, however, certain mice were prized as delicacies. They were carefully raised, fed, and cooked for the tables of the wealthy. The dormouse is not quite like the mice we know. It is a small rodent, soft and plump, with a furry tail. It hibernates in winter, curling into a ball to sleep for many months. Because of its size and fat, it was seen as a perfect food for roasting or stuffing. Romans did not eat dormice caught in the streets. They kept them in special containers called gleraria. A glorarium was a large clay pot, smooth on the inside so the mice could not escape. It had small air holes and sometimes a feeding trough built into the wall. The mice were given nuts, chestnuts, and acorns to fatten them. For the Romans, raising dormice was almost an art. They wanted the animals to grow plump and tender. A fattened dormouse was a sign of luxury. Only wealthy families could afford them regularly. They became a symbol of refinement, a dish for the elite. Cookbooks tell us how they were prepared. One recipe suggests stuffing them with pork, pepper, pine nuts, and herbs. Then they were sewn shut and roasted. Sometimes they were dipped in honey and poppy seeds. Other times they were served in thick sauces flavored with garum. The sight must have been both delicate and strange. A small roasted creature, golden from honey, sprinkled with seeds. Served on a silver plate, it would have been a surprise to the guest. At a banquet, such dishes were designed to amaze. The smaller and rarer, the more fashionable. Writers of the time even criticized this habit. Some thought it wasteful, even decadent. Pliny the Elder, for example, mentioned the practice with a note of disapproval. To him, fattening mice for food showed how far luxury had gone in Rome. But for the wealthy, it was a point of pride. Dormice were not only roasted, sometimes they were preserved in honey. Placed in jars, covered with sweetness, they could last many weeks. This made them a treat for later feasts. A jar of honeyed dormice was a gift fit for a noble. The texture must have been soft, delicate, almost like a small pastry. The flavor was likely mild, carried by the herbs and sauces around it. Pepper, honey, garum, and nuts gave each bite complexity. The Romans rarely ate anything plain. Even the simplest foods were dressed in layers of taste. At feasts, dormice were served between courses. They were not the main dish. They were a surprise, an ornament to the meal, something to make guests talk, laugh, and marvel. To serve dormice was to show both wealth and daring. Imagine a Roman banquet hall. The walls are painted with bright frescoes of gardens and gods. The lamps flicker softly. Music plays in the background, gentle strings and pipes. A servant approaches, carrying a platter. On it rest several roasted dormice, each golden and shining with honey. The guests lean forward. They smile, curious, amused, perhaps even a little nervous. The host gestures proudly, inviting them to taste, and soon, laughter and chatter fill the room as the dish is passed. To modern eyes, the idea may feel unsettling, but to Romans, this was refinement. This was culture, style, and extravagance. It was not the mouse itself, but the meaning behind it. Luxury in small things, carefully prepared. The practice lasted for centuries. Archaeologists have even found glararia, the clay jars used for keeping dormice. Some are displayed in museums today. Their smooth interiors and air holes tell us exactly how the mice were kept. The evidence matches the words of Roman writers. It is strange to think of a pot filled with mice as a treasure. Yet for a Roman noble, it was just that, a sign of wealth, a mark of taste, a conversation piece at the table. The more unusual the dish, the greater the impression it made. In this way, the Romans showed who they were, adventurous, curious, and never satisfied with the ordinary. Even a tiny creature could become a delicacy. Even a mouse could be turned into a feast. As you picture this, let your mind wander softly. See the flicker of the lamps. Hear the gentle laughter. Smell the honey and herbs rising from the platter. The dormice are strange, but in their strangeness lies calm. The past opens slowly, like a dream. And so, with dormice on silver plates, we drift deeper into Roman dining. Strange foods, curious tastes, each more surprising than the last. Section 4. Flamingo tongues and exotic birds. Among the strangest foods loved by wealthy Romans, none is more curious than the tongue of the flamingo. The Romans admired birds, not only for their beauty, but also for their taste. They raised chickens, hunted wild fowl, and bought exotic birds from faraway lands. And in the banquets of the elite, rare birds were turned into rare dishes. The flamingo was admired for its bright feathers. Its long legs, curved beak, and pink wings made it stand out from other birds. But in Roman kitchens, it was the tongue that was most desired. Apicius, the famous Roman gastronome, included recipes for flamingo tongue in his book. It was thought to be tender, rich, and filled with flavor. To us, the idea may seem unusual. Why focus on such a small part of the bird? But for the Romans, rarity was part of the pleasure. To serve a dish that was both exotic and difficult to prepare showed true wealth. The more unusual the food, the more honor it gave the host. Flamingos were brought into Rome from North Africa and the eastern provinces. They were not common in Italy, so their presence at a feast was already a marvel. Their tongues, carefully removed and prepared, were seasoned with strong sauces. Honey, vinegar, pepper, and garum were added, balancing sweet, sour, and salty notes. The result was delicate, rich, and unforgettable. Roman feasts often included other birds as well. Peacocks, swans, parrots, and cranes were all roasted and displayed. Sometimes they were served whole, feathers still on, for spectacle. The beauty of the bird was shown before it was eaten. In some cases, peacocks were roasted and then redressed in their feathers before serving. The tongue of the flamingo, however, carried a special prestige. It was not simply about taste. It was about daring, about showing that the host could offer something no one else could. In a society where reputation was everything, food became a language of power, and flamingo tongues spoke loudly. Writers sometimes mocked this habit. Juvenal, the satirical poet, laughed at the excess of Roman banquets. He saw flamingo tongues as a symbol of waste and vanity. To him, such meals were proof that Rome had become too indulgent. But still, the practice continued. Apicius gave recipes not only for flamingos, but also for ostriches. Ostrich meat was stewed with herbs and honey, then thickened with flour. The dish was heavy, rich, and filling. It showed the Roman taste for both strangeness and abundance. If flamingo tongues were delicate, ostrich stews were hearty and bold. Other birds were served in creative ways. Crane meat was roasted and dipped in sauces. Parrots were stewed or baked in pies. Even nightingales, admired for their song, were sometimes placed on the table. The more exotic the bird, the more impressive the feast. Imagine a Roman dining hall during one of these banquets. The walls are covered with frescoes of gardens and birds in flight. The air is warm with the smell of roasted meats and honeyed sauces. Servants enter with trays of golden dishes. The guests recline, whispering, curious to see what comes next. Then, on a silver plate, the tongues of flamingos appear. Tiny portions, each carefully seasoned. They are passed around the room, one by one. The guests lean forward, tasting, nodding, smiling at the unusual flavor. It is a moment of surprise, a moment of pleasure, a moment of pride for the host. To the Romans, eating such foods was not strange. It was part of their culture of excess. They valued novelty, intensity, and showmanship. They wanted their meals to amaze as much as to feed. A banquet was a performance, and the flamingo tongue was one of its acts. Behind the spectacle, there was also trade and labor. Hunters in distant lands captured flamingos. Merchants transported them across seas and rivers. Cooks in Roman kitchens prepared them carefully, grinding spices, mixing sauces, roasting meat. The luxury of a single bite carried the work of many hands. Not every Roman could taste flamingo tongue. For the poor, meals were simple: bread, porridge, beans, and perhaps a little cheese or fish. Only the wealthy elite could afford such extravagance. And so, the food itself became a divider between classes. To eat flamingo tongue was not just to eat, it was to declare one's place in society. The fascination with birds even reached Roman art. Mosaics in villas show images of flamingos, ducks, and cranes. Feasts were painted on walls, displaying plates of poultry and game. Food and art blended, each reflecting the other. To see a bode on a wall was to imagine it also on the table. As time passed, tastes changed. Some of these dishes faded with the fall of Rome, yet the memory of them remains in the cookbooks and writings. When we read them now, they seem strange, almost unbelievable. But for the Romans, they were simply a mark of refinement. As you rest, picture the glowing lamps of the dining hall. Hear the soft music in the background. See the flash of pink feathers, the gleam of silver plates. Smell the honey, vinegar, and garum rising together in the air, and feel the calm strangeness of a world where even a flamingo's tongue could be a treasure. Slowly, gently, the feast continues, each dish stranger than the last, each flavor a mix of salt, sweet, and sour, each moment both curious and calm. Section 5. Garum, Rome's fermented treasure. Among all the foods of ancient Rome, none was more loved, more essential, and yet more unsettling to us today than garum. Garum was a fermented fish sauce, made by letting small fish or fish guts slowly rot in the sun with layers of salt. To the Romans, it was not disgusting. It was delicious, prized, and celebrated. It flavored their stews, their roasts, their breads, even their desserts. Garum was to Rome what soy sauce is to East Asia, or ketchup to modern tables. Ever present, beloved, and impossible to imagine meals without. The making of garum was simple, yet it carried an art of its own. Fishermen collected anchovies, sardines, mackerel, or even leftover fish heads and innards. These were placed in large clay vats, mixed with salt, and left in the hot Mediterranean sun. Over weeks, sometimes months, the fish broke down. The natural enzymes and the salt transformed the mess into a thick, golden brown liquid. When the mixture was finally strained, what remained was garum, smooth, pungent, and deeply savory. To modern ears, it sounds unpleasant. A sauce made of decomposed fish parts does not call to mind delicacy, yet the Romans adored it. The smell might have been strong, but the taste was something entirely new. Salty, tangy, with an umami richness that filled dishes with life. The Romans sprinkled it on almost everything, from meat to vegetables, from beans to eggs. It became the secret ingredient of their cuisine, the quiet foundation of flavor. Garum was not only food, it was a business. Factories for making it stretched along the coasts of Spain, North Africa, and southern Italy. The climate there was perfect, hot, dry, and full of fish. Huge amphorae, tall clay jars, were filled with garum and shipped across the empire, from Britain to Syria. From Gaul to Egypt, garum was sold and traded. To find garum in a faraway market was to feel connected to Rome itself. Not all garum was equal. There were grades, just as with wine. The highest quality, made from the freshest small fish, produced a clear golden liquid. This was called garum sociorum, and it was incredibly expensive. Only the wealthy could afford it, pouring it generously at banquets, showing off their taste. The lower grades were thicker, darker, made from scraps. These were sold more cheaply and eaten by common citizens. Even the poorest Romans, however, could taste a bit of garum on their bread or in their porridge. The taste of garum was so beloved that it even entered Roman medicine. Doctors prescribed it for stomach troubles, for wounds, and for general health. Pliny the Elder wrote about its healing powers, claiming it could cure ulcers and soothe pain. Whether true or not, people believed in it. Garum was more than a flavor. It was part of life itself. At Roman banquets, garum was everywhere. It was poured into sauces, mixed with wine, blended with honey and herbs. Lamb might be roasted and then glazed with garum. Vegetables might be dipped in it. Even desserts were sometimes touched with it, creating sweet and salty combinations that surprise us today. A guest at a feast might not always notice it, but it was there, hidden behind the other flavors. It was the invisible star of the meal. The smell of garum was legendary. Factories along the coast gave off such strong odors that nearby towns often complained. Yet people accepted it because the profit was great. Ships loaded with amphorae of garum sailed constantly to Rome, bringing wealth to port cities. The sauce was so valuable that amphorae have been found with careful seals, marked with the maker's name, almost like a brand. It was not just a food, it was a status symbol. Garum even found its way into Roman politics. Some wealthy citizens invested in garum factories. Others gave it as gifts, showing friendship or loyalty. To send a jar of fine garum sociorum was to send a taste of luxury. It bound people together, not only through appetite, but through power. Imagine, if you will, the process. The heat of the sun, beating down on rows of clay vats. The shimmer of the sea in the distance. Fishermen unloading their catch. The slow bubbling of fish and salt, breaking apart, merging, transforming. And then, at last, the golden liquid, strained, bottled, shipped away. From this humble beginning came a flavor that fed an empire. At a Roman table, the jar of garum might sit close at hand. A little drizzle on bread, a splash into a stew, a touch on roasted meat. The diners might hardly think of it, but they would notice if it were missing. The food would feel flat, empty, without its depth. With garum, everything sang. Even in death, garum appeared. Archaeologists have found amphorae in Roman graves left as offerings. Perhaps the deceased was meant to carry the taste of home into the afterlife. It shows how deeply this sauce was woven into Roman identity. To us, garum may seem one of the strangest foods the Romans ate, but to them it was life, health, and comfort. A dish without garum was like a day without sun. It filled their meals, their markets, their stories. Their medicine. It was everywhere, always. And so, as you drift gently, imagine the Mediterranean coast, the warm breeze carrying the scent of salt and fish, the vats lined up under the sky, waiting, transforming, the amphorae standing tall, sealed and ready to sail, the taste of Rome itself, bottled in golden liquid, a flavor both strange and beloved, flowing through the empire like a quiet river. Section 6. The delicacy of stuffed dormice. Among the unusual foods enjoyed in Rome, few capture the imagination as much as the humble dormice, a small rodent, soft and furry. The dormice does not seem like a feast, yet for the wealthy of Rome, it was considered a delicacy. Served roasted, stuffed, or dipped in honey, the dormice became a symbol of refined dining. Its presence on the banquet table was not only about taste, but also about luxury and display. The Romans did not simply catch dormice in the wild. They built special enclosures for them, called gleraria. These were stone jars or walled pits, filled with moss, branches, and food. Inside, the dormice could grow plump and fat. Farmers tended them carefully, much like others tended chickens or geese. It was a quiet industry dedicated to raising rodents for the wealthy. The recipes for dormice show how valued they were. One common preparation was to stuff the dormice with minced pork, pepper, pine nuts, and herbs. The little animal was then roasted until golden, and sometimes glazed with honey. Another version called for dipping it in honey and sprinkling it with poppy seeds, a sweet and savory mix. The result was both strange and refined, a dish that showed off the cook's skill and the host's wealth. For ordinary people, the thought of eating a dormice might have seemed strange, but for the elite, novelty was part of the attraction. Banquets were occasions to impress, to bring rare flavors to the table. A dish of stuffed dormice was a way to surprise guests, to make them murmur with admiration. Food was never just food. It was performance, and the dormice played its role well. Writers of the time sometimes commented on this habit. Some admired the refinement, while others mocked the extravagance. The poet Martial joked about the absurd dishes of the rich. Pliny the Elder noted the breeding of dormice as one of Rome's curiosities. Through their words, we glimpse a culture where even a rodent could become a prized dish. The taste of dormice we cannot know for sure. Some say it was like rabbit, others compare it to squirrel. Perhaps the flavor was not the point. It was the setting, the stuffing, the spices, the presentation, surrounded by wine, garlands, and music. The dormice was transformed from a small animal into a symbol of plenty. Picture the gleraria, the quiet jars where the dormice slept. They lived in darkness, fed on chestnuts, acorns, and seeds. Slowly they grew rounder, fatter, until the day came when they were taken out. The cook would prepare them with careful hands, seasoning them with pepper, cumin, or honey. And then, on a silver tray, they would be brought to the guests. The sight might have been both charming and unsettling. A tiny creature, carefully prepared, its skin crisped, its body stuffed with herbs. Guests would laugh softly, nibbling the delicate morsels. The flavor would mingle with wine, with bread, with sauces. For the wealthy, it was not strange, it was delightful, part of the great tapestry of taste. The presence of dormice shows us how far Rome's appetite could reach. Nothing was too small, too unusual, to be transformed into food. From sea urchins to peacocks, from sow's womb to stuffed dormice, the Roman table was a place of experimentation. It reflected not only hunger, but also curiosity, creativity, and excess. The dormice, plump and roasted, became one note in this wide symphony of eating. Even the laws of Rome noticed the dormice. At times, restrictions were placed on how it could be raised, perhaps to limit extravagance. Yet these rules did little to lessen its popularity among the elite. Where wealth gathered, so did rare foods, and the dormice remained, scurrying quietly into the history of taste. In the quiet of a Roman villa, imagine the scene. A cook in the kitchen, gently stuffing herbs and nuts into tiny bodies. A servant arranging silver plates, laying down garlands of flowers. The gentle sound of a fountain in the courtyard, the smell of roasted meat drifting through the halls. Soon the guests would arrive, reclining on couches, waiting for the surprise of the meal. The dormice, in its way, tells us about Roman life. It shows us their resourcefulness, their desire to turn even the smallest animal into a dish. It shows us their love of display, their wish to astonish friends with unusual foods. And it shows us how food in Rome was never simple. It was always layered, with meaning, with wealth, with performance. Strange though it may seem, the dormice remains one of the best remembered Roman delicacies. Archaeologists find the remains of gleraria, those jars where the little animals were kept. Writers preserved the recipes, handed down in old cookbooks, And so we know, even centuries later, how a small rodent could become a star of the feast. It is both curious and revealing, a window into the Roman taste for the unusual. As you rest now, let the image settle softly in your mind. A quiet villa, a banquet ready, the faint song of cicadas outside. On a silver dish, a row of tiny roasted dormice, golden and glistening. Guests lean forward, smiling, curious, eager to taste. The strangeness becomes beauty, the odd becomes tradition. And in that calm moment, the banquet continues, timeless and serene. Section 7. Flamingo tongues and exotic birds. Among the many unusual foods on the Roman table, few sound stranger to us than flamingo tongues. Yes, the Romans, especially the wealthy and the powerful, enjoyed eating the tongues of flamingos. These birds, tall and elegant, with their pink feathers and long necks, were prized for their rarity. To serve flamingo was to show immense wealth. To serve only the tongue was to show extravagance beyond measure. Why the tongue? Writers suggest it was considered tender, rich in flavor, and rare by nature. One bird, one tongue. To gather enough for a feast meant capturing many flamingos, a costly and difficult task. The scarcity made the dish even more prized. To taste it was to know one stood in the circle of the elite. The Roman cookbook Apicius, a collection of recipes attributed to the gourmet Marcus Gavius Apicius, gives us a glimpse into how these tongues were prepared. They were often boiled gently, then served with sauces of vinegar, honey, and spices. Sometimes they were roasted, sometimes minced into stews. The flavor was said to be delicate, more refined than other meats. For the diners, it was not simply food, but a moment of luxury, a story to tell. Flamingos were not common in all parts of the empire. They were found along the coasts, in marshes and in North Africa. To bring them to Rome required effort, trade, and wealth. Hunters captured them in nets, often in large groups. They were transported alive, their brilliant feathers shimmering, before being slaughtered for the kitchens of the rich. Imagine the scene in a Roman villa. The cook, having received the prized birds, begins his work. He cuts away the tongues carefully, sets them aside. The bodies of the birds may be roasted or stewed, but it is the tongues that will be placed on fine plates, spiced, sauced, arranged in rows. They become the jewel of the banquet. Not everyone approved of such extravagance. Some Roman writers mocked the habit, calling it wasteful and absurd. They saw it as a sign of corruption, of a society drowning in luxury. To them, the idea of hunting a whole bird just for its tongue was madness. Yet this very madness, this wastefulness, was what made it desirable to the rich. For the guests at such a feast, there was no disgust. Instead, there was laughter, curiosity, and admiration. One might taste a single tongue, small and tender, flavored with pepper and honey. The sensation would linger as wine followed, as music played in the background. It was not about fullness, it was about taste, novelty, and status. Flamingo tongues were not alone in this habit. Romans often singled out unusual parts of animals as delicacies. Peacock brains, sow's udders, parrotfish livers, each was praised for its rarity. The more unusual the part, the more admired it was. It showed that food was not about need, but about artistry and display. Pliny the Elder, who often recorded the curiosities of Roman life, wrote of flamingos with interest. He described their bright red feathers and their strange, curving beaks. He noted that their tongues were considered especially delicious. His words give us not only a fact, but a feeling, the sense of wonder at what Romans considered fine dining. It allows us, even now, to imagine their tables, their tastes, their sense of the extraordinary. The presence of flamingos at banquets also had a visual power. The pink feathers, sometimes used in decorations, added a touch of exotic beauty. A dish of tongues might be paired with garlands of flowers, bowls of fruit, and golden lamps. The sight was as much part of the feast as the flavor. For the Romans, eating was always about the senses: sight, sound, smell, and touch, as well as taste. To picture it now is to enter a different world. A hall lit by oil lamps, music drifting from lyres and flutes, guests reclining on couches, speaking softly, sipping wine, and in their hands, small dishes of flamingo tongues, tender and spiced. It seemed strange, almost surreal, but to them it was the height of refinement. Even in their strangeness, these foods remind us of something human: the desire to stand out, to taste what others cannot, to share in a secret luxury. Flamingo tongues were not about hunger. They were about belonging, about showing one's place in society. In that way, they were no different from jewels, fine clothes, or rare perfumes. They were a marker, a symbol, a way of saying, "I am part of the world of wealth." The flamingo itself, graceful and rare, carried symbolism too. To eat it was to consume beauty, to capture the exotic. It was not an everyday bird, not a chicken or a duck. It was a creature of marshes and faraway coasts, touched by strangeness. To place it on the table was to bring the exotic into the heart of Rome. And so the tongues, small and delicate, became one of the empire's strangest loves. To us they seem odd, even unsettling, but to the Romans they were treasure, a taste worth the effort, the cost, and the waste. They remind us that food is never only food. It is culture, desire, and the story of what people value most. As you drift now, let the image soften in your mind: the tall flamingos, their feathers glowing in the sun; the quiet kitchens of Rome, where their tongues were prepared with care; the laughter of guests, the clink of cups, the taste of something rare and strange, and the gentle truth that even the oddest dishes can tell us about a people, about their dreams, about their lives. Section 8. The delicacy of sea urchins. When we think of Roman feasts, we imagine meat, bread, and wine. Yet, the Romans also had a taste for the sea, and among their stranger choices was the sea urchin. Spiny, round, and prickly, the sea urchin hardly looks like food. Its shell is covered in hard spines, difficult to hold, difficult to open. But inside lies a soft, golden flesh that the Romans found irresistible. Sea urchins were collected from the coasts of the Mediterranean. Fishermen waded into the shallow water, prying them from rocks with care. Their spines could sting, so gloves or tools were sometimes used. The catch was then brought to the market, still alive, their shells dark and bristling. To a Roman cook, these odd creatures were treasure waiting to be unlocked. The Roman gourmet Apicius gives us recipes for sea urchins. One method was simple: break open the shell and serve the roe raw, sprinkled with pepper and garum. Another recipe called for baking them gently, filling the shell with herbs and wine. Sometimes they were stewed with vinegar and honey, creating a sweet and salty blend. The taste was creamy, briny, and rich, a reminder of the sea itself. For Romans, eating sea urchins was not only about flavor. It was also about variety, about proving that the sea's hidden creatures could be turned into delicacies. They prized foods that seemed rare or difficult, that showed skill in preparation. To take something spiny and strange and transform it into a dish was to show mastery. It made the banquet more than a meal. It made it an experience. Imagine a Roman banquet table. On one tray, roasted meats. On another, baskets of bread. And then a dish of sea urchins, their shells opened, the golden flesh glistening inside. Guests might lean forward with curiosity, lifting the roe gently with a spoon, tasting the sea in each bite. The symbolism of sea urchins mattered too. They came from the deep, from a world hidden beneath the waves. Bringing them to the table was like bringing mystery itself. It reminded guests of the vastness of the empire, stretching across coasts and seas. It showed that Rome could draw even the strangest treasures from the waters. Not all Romans approved, of course. Some mocked the habit, finding it excessive. But for those who enjoyed them, sea urchins were the height of refinement. Their flavor was said to be so rich that a small amount was enough. A single bite could linger, blending with the taste of wine, filling the senses. The preparation itself carried a ritual. The shells cracked open carefully, the roe scooped out with precision. The addition of garum, honey, or herbs created layers of flavor. Each bite was smooth and salty, both strange and delightful. It was food, but it was also discovery. A taste of the unknown. In Roman markets, sea urchins might be displayed alongside oysters and mussels. Vendors called out their freshness, praising the catch of the day. The wealthy sent servants to buy them, ensuring they would appear at the evening feast. Even in the bustle of the marketplace, the sea urchin stood apart, unusual and eye-catching. Its spiny shell promised something rare, something out of the ordinary. The presence of sea urchins at banquets tells us something deeper. Romans did not settle for the simple or the plain. They sought out variety, surprise, and luxury. They wanted foods that spoke of distance, of effort, of wealth. To eat sea urchins was to show that nothing was beyond reach. Picture the coastline where they were gathered, the clear blue water lapping gently against rocks, fishermen bending down, prying spiny shells from the sea's edge, the sun glinting on the waves, the smell of salt in the air, and in baskets, the strange, round creatures waiting to be transformed. At the banquet, the mood was calm and curious. Wine cups clinked, laughter drifted through the air. Guests leaned back on couches, soft lamplight flickering around them, and in their hands, small spoons lifted the golden roe of sea urchins. The taste was rich, lingering, like a sea carried onto the land. To us, the idea may seem odd, even unsettling. But to the Romans, it was beauty in disguise. They saw in the sea urchin not a spiny shell, but a secret waiting to be revealed. And when revealed, it was more than food. It was wonder. It was proof that Rome's appetite could embrace anything, even the mysteries of the sea. So let the image drift in your mind. The banquet hall, the glow of oil lamps, the quiet music of flutes. On the table, a dish of sea urchins, opened like flowers of the sea. Guests taste them slowly, their faces calm, their words soft. It is strange, yes, but also serene. A piece of the sea shared among friends. Section 9. Fried sow's womb, a curious Roman treat among the strangest Roman foods. The womb of a sow stands out. To modern eyes, it may seem shocking or even unpleasant. Yet for the wealthy Romans, it was a prized dish, delicately prepared and carefully served. It was part of their desire for rare, unusual foods, and a reflection of status and taste. The sow, a common domestic animal, was valued for many parts of its body. Meat, lard, skin, and organs all found their way into Roman kitchens. The womb, however, was especially appreciated for its tenderness. Cookbooks of the time, like those of Apicius, describe it seasoned with herbs, fried in oil, and sometimes dipped in honey or garum. The Romans were experts in transforming simple ingredients into luxurious experiences. Preparation required care and skill. The womb was cleaned and sliced into manageable pieces. Herbs like coriander, lovage, and rue might be added for fragrance. A light coating of flour or breadcrumbs could be applied before frying. Some recipes called for gentle frying, while others baked it with a mixture of spices and honey. The goal was always tenderness and a delicate balance of flavors. At a Roman banquet, fried sow's womb was often served as a small course. It was not the main dish, but a surprise between larger plates of meat and fish. Its richness and unusual origin made it memorable. Guests would pick it up carefully, tasting the soft, subtly flavored morsel. The experience was less about filling the stomach and more about delighting the senses. The popularity of such a dish reflects the Roman love for novelty. They prized foods that seemed rare, strange, or difficult to prepare. Eating a fried sow's womb was a mark of sophistication. It showed the host's wealth, their connection to skilled cooks, and their willingness to embrace the unusual. Banquets were performances, and each dish played a role in the spectacle. Not all Romans were eager to try these exotic foods. Some found the idea shocking, others laughed at the extravagance. Poets and satirists occasionally mocked the wealthy for such indulgences. Yet these dishes persisted, treasured by those who valued status and sensation. Even the smell, rich and aromatic from frying, was part of the experience. The flavors of fried sow's womb were subtle yet distinct. The natural richness of the organ was enhanced by spices and oil. Honey, vinegar, or garum could add layers of sweetness or tang. A bite might carry warmth, saltiness, and a hint of the herbs used. It was a gentle but memorable taste, lingering pleasantly on the tongue. In markets, organs like the womb were sold carefully. Vendors cleaned and displayed them for the wealthy or adventurous cooks. Freshness was crucial. The Romans valued ingredients that were new and properly handled. The womb had to be tender, untainted, and prepared with precision. A small mistake could ruin the dish, so skilled preparation was highly prized. Imagine a Roman villa preparing for a banquet. The kitchen is warm, lit by sunlight through narrow windows. Cooks chop herbs, mix oils, and carefully handle each ingredient. The sow's womb is seasoned, coated, and fried gently in large pans of oil. A tray of golden, fragrant morsels is ready to be carried to the dining hall. Guests recline on couches, soft cushions beneath them, oil lamps flickering. The aroma drifts through the room, subtle and inviting. A small dish is placed before each guest. Delicate slices of fried womb arranged like a tiny bouquet. Wine cups clink softly. Conversation flows quietly. The sound of a fountain adds calm. The moment is intimate, ceremonial, yet oddly soothing. Such foods show us how the Romans understood luxury. It was not only quantity, but rarity, effort, and presentation. The unusual nature of the dish added value and curiosity. It sparked conversation, amusement, and admiration. And in this quiet appreciation, the banquet became an experience that transcended mere eating. The fried sow's womb also reflects the Roman view of the body. Every part of an animal could be used, each with its own purpose. Nothing was wasted, and each ingredient could be transformed into a delicacy. From common pigs to exotic birds, from the sea to the farm, the Romans explored all possibilities. Their creativity in cuisine was matched only by their attention to detail. Even centuries later, the practice fascinates us. Archaeologists find traces of banquets, remnants of utensils, and sometimes inscriptions noting food. Writings describe flavors, techniques, and reactions of guests. The strange, delicate dishes show the curiosity and inventiveness of Roman cooks. They remind us that even unusual foods can carry meaning, culture, and artistry. As you imagine this now, let your mind drift slowly. The warm kitchen, the sizzling oil, the scent of herbs mingling with frying meat, the soft glow of lamps, the gentle conversation in the dining hall. Small golden morsels of fried womb, picked up carefully by eager hands. The taste, subtle and rich, melting on the tongue. The strangeness becomes calm. The odd becomes familiar. In the quiet of the villa, the banquet continues. Each dish, no matter how unusual, contributes to the gentle rhythm of the evening. And in that rhythm, we find a strange comfort, a reminder of the care, curiosity, and imagination that shaped Roman dining. Section 10. Boiled ostrich, Rome's exotic feast. Among the many rare foods of ancient Rome, ostrich held a special place. Tall, powerful, and exotic, these birds were not native to Italy. They came from the deserts and plains of Africa, far beyond the borders of the empire. To see one in a Roman market was already extraordinary. To eat one, carefully prepared, was a mark of wealth and sophistication. The Romans admired the ostrich, not only for its size, but also for its novelty. Its long legs, large eyes, and graceful neck made it a striking creature. Wealthy citizens sent merchants to bring ostriches alive or freshly butchered. The arrival of such a bird at a villa caused curiosity and admiration among guests. It was not simply food, it was spectacle. Preparation of ostrich required care and skill. Cooks boiled large pieces of meat slowly in water, often with herbs like lovage, coriander, and rue. Sometimes wine or vinegar was added to soften the tough fibers. The Romans might also stew the meat with honey and spices, creating a rich, sweet, and savory dish. Cooking an entire ostrich was a lengthy process, often taking hours or even a full day. Serving ostrich at a banquet was as much about presentation as taste. Slices of dark, tender meat were arranged on large plates. The size of the portions and the rarity of the bird impressed the guests. Even the bones might be carved artistically, displayed alongside the meat. The experience was both visual and gustatory, a true combination of senses. The taste of boiled ostrich was reportedly strong, richer than chicken, yet delicate in texture. The meat absorbed the flavors of herbs, wine, and honey, creating a complex experience. A single bite might surprise the palate, while a few more would linger with savory satisfaction. Wine paired with the meat enhanced its richness, adding a soft, gentle warmth to the mouth. Each mouthful was part of a careful orchestration of flavors, textures, and aromas. The fascination with ostrich reflects Roman curiosity and ambition. They sought foods from distant lands, foods that were rare, that carried stories of foreign places. Boiling an ostrich was not a necessity, it was an act of prestige. The process showed skill, patience, and wealth, all qualities admired in Roman society. A host who could present ostrich at a feast demonstrated both reach and refinement. Even the preparation of ostrich had ceremonial elements. Cooks often handled the meat with long utensils, careful not to damage the delicate slices. Servants carried trays with silent precision, arranging the portions in elegant patterns. Guests reclining on soft cushions, wine in hand. Watching the display unfold, the slow, deliberate service added to the calm and measured enjoyment of the meal. The arrival of the ostrich at the table also created conversation. Its exotic origin sparked curiosity, prompting stories of distant lands and trade routes. Guests might ask about the journey, the habitat of the bird, or the process of preparation. Each detail added to the experience, making the meal as much about knowledge and culture as about taste. Food in Rome was never only about sustenance, it was about the world it represented. Boiled ostrich also shows the Roman approach to novelty. They were willing to try flavors, textures, and forms unfamiliar to most people. Their culinary creativity extended even to animals unfamiliar in Europe. By introducing exotic ingredients, they created meals that were surprising, impressive, and memorable. Ostrich was one of the most extreme examples of this adventurous appetite. Markets and ports played an important role in this process. Merchants transported live ostriches across seas, a dangerous and difficult task. The birds were carefully fed and housed during travel, arriving as intact as possible. Once in the city, they were sold to wealthy buyers who could afford both the bird and the preparation. The effort involved made the dish even more prestigious. At the banquet, the atmosphere was serene, almost ritualistic. The guests reclined on couches, oil lamps casting a warm glow. The aroma of herbs, wine, and simmering meat filled the air. Dishes were passed slowly, allowing each guest to appreciate the texture, aroma, and flavor. The ostrich, once a wild creature of distant lands, became part of a gentle, calm feast. The preparation of ostrich also reflected Roman resourcefulness. Cooks used every part of the bird, often turning offal into soups or sauces. Nothing went to waste, and every element of the animal contributed to the meal. This careful utilization highlights the blend of luxury and practicality in Roman cuisine. Even the grandest feasts had an underlying logic, balancing extravagance with skill. Imagine the moment in the villa. A massive bird, once roaming distant plains, now rests on a silver platter. Cooks have sliced the tender meat, sprinkled it with herbs and honey. Guests lean forward, tasting slowly, savoring each bite. The unfamiliar flavor, delicate and rich, lingers in the mouth, accompanied by the gentle warmth of wine. Boiled ostrich reminds us of the ambition of Roman cuisine. It shows a people fascinated with rarity, willing to travel great distances and spend much effort to create a unique experience. It was both food and story, flavor and spectacle. And even centuries later, imagining the scene evokes curiosity, calm, and wonder. So, as you settle into quiet, picture the villa once more. The soft glow of lamps, the gentle hum of conversation, the aroma of herbs and cooking meat. A tray of boiled ostrich, tender and golden, carefully arranged before attentive guests. The taste is exotic, surprising, and calm. A gentle reminder of a world both strange and civilized. Section 11. Fish bladder jelly, Rome's curious creation. Among the strangest dishes in ancient Rome, fish bladder jelly stands out. To us, the idea may sound strange or even unappetizing. Yet for the Romans, it was a delicacy, admired for its texture and novelty. The dish demonstrates how Roman cuisine explored not only taste, but also form and creativity. It was a food that balanced surprise, elegance, and subtle flavor. Fish bladders were often collected from larger fish, such as sturgeon or mullet. These internal organs, usually discarded in most cultures, became a prized ingredient. Carefully cleaned, they were boiled or soaked to soften them. The result was a gelatinous substance, which could be flavored with honey, wine, Herbs, or garum. The transformation from a discarded organ into an edible jelly was part of the Roman fascination with culinary ingenuity. Preparation required patience and skill. Cooks gently heated the bladders in water, often adding fragrant herbs or a splash of wine. The jelly slowly formed, a clear, delicate consistency. It might be molded into small shapes or served simply in a bowl. The Romans appreciated the texture above all, soft, smooth, and slightly wobbly, a novelty compared to ordinary meats. At banquets, fish bladder jelly was often served as a side dish or an appetizer. It did not overwhelm the palate, but offered a delicate, surprising sensation. Guests might take a small spoonful, tasting its gentle flavor, while other dishes surrounded it. The aroma was subtle, the texture mesmerizing, a quiet wonder in the midst of a rich feast. The dish also symbolized Roman ingenuity and status. By using parts of the fish that were usually discarded, cooks demonstrated skill. The wealthy, who could afford the preparation, showcased their refined tastes. The jelly became not only food, but conversation, a topic of fascination among curious guests. It was a way of turning the unusual into the desirable. Flavoring varied according to taste and availability. Some recipes added honey to provide a soft sweetness. Others incorporated herbs such as coriander or rue, giving a delicate fragrance. Garum could add a hint of savory depth, balancing the gentle texture. The resulting combination was subtle but sophisticated, inviting slow, attentive tasting. Fish bladder jelly also reflected Roman ideas about luxury. It was not about filling the stomach. It was about the experience, the craftsmanship, the story behind the dish. The exotic or unusual nature of an ingredient elevated a banquet, transforming it into a cultural event. Jelly made from bladders was a testament to the creativity, patience, and curiosity of Roman cooks. Even the preparation had ceremonial elements. Cooks worked with care, ensuring the jelly would form correctly. The gelatinous consistency required attention to temperature and timing. Once ready, it was often arranged elegantly on silver or glass dishes, sometimes shaped into patterns. The jelly added visual as well as gustatory delight. The presentation was part of the fascination. Guests would lean forward, admiring the clarity, the smooth surface, the delicate wobble. A small spoon lifted a portion, revealing its shimmering texture. The subtle taste followed, light and slightly sweet or aromatic. It was a quiet delight, a gentle, calming pleasure amid more robust flavors of the feast. Markets supplied the raw materials, but not everyone could use them. Only skilled cooks and wealthy households could transform fish bladders into edible jelly. Freshness was critical. The bladders had to be handled carefully, cleaned thoroughly, and stored properly until cooking. A minor mistake could ruin the texture, making the dish too firm or too runny. The dish also carried social meaning. Serving fish bladder jelly demonstrated sophistication and knowledge of culinary arts. Guests understood the effort, the novelty, and the refinement involved. It was a subtle display of wealth and taste, requiring little space on the table, but leaving a lasting impression. Roman cuisine valued such small, delicate innovations. Even today, the dish fascinates historians and culinary enthusiasts. It shows how Romans viewed food not only as nourishment, but also as art and curiosity. They sought to transform every possible ingredient into something extraordinary. In doing so, they created dishes that still surprise and intrigue us centuries later. Fish bladder jelly is an example of subtlety, patience, and the gentle playfulness of Roman taste. Imagine the scene in a Roman villa. The kitchen is quiet. sunlight filtering through narrow windows. Cooks work slowly, monitoring temperature, stirring gently, adding herbs and honey. In the dining hall, oil lamps glow, casting soft shadows. Guests recline on couches, sipping wine, soft music playing. As small bowls of jelly are presented, the first taste is gentle, surprising, soft and smooth. The handcrafted texture invites slow, mindful eating. The aroma of herbs mingles with the faint sweetness of honey. And though the ingredient may seem unusual, the experience is calm and satisfying. It is a reminder that even the strangest foods can be transformed into something beautiful and serene. The jelly also symbolizes Roman creativity. They used knowledge, skill, and patience to make something delightful from the unexpected. Every bite reflects a culture that valued curiosity and refinement. Even in strangeness, there is elegance. Even in oddity, there is calm, careful pleasure. As you drift gently, imagine the quiet villa, the warm glow of oil lamps, soft conversation, the scent of herbs and honey, bowls of delicate fish bladder jelly, shimmering gently on silver trays, guests tasting slowly, appreciating texture, aroma, and subtle flavor. A dish strange to us, yet calm, refined, and quietly fascinating. Section 12. Peacock brains, a taste of prestige. In the world of Roman cuisine, few foods were as rare and striking as peacock brains. Peacocks, with their brilliant feathers and long tails, were symbols of wealth and beauty. To eat the brain of such a bird was to consume not only its flesh, but a piece of its prestige. The wealthy Romans valued it for its delicacy, its rarity, and the subtle flavors it offered. It was not simply sustenance, it was a moment of elegance and attention, part of a carefully orchestrated feast. Peacocks were not native to Rome. They were brought from India and other distant lands, their exotic appearance making them highly prized. Capturing or trading peacocks was difficult, so only the richest could afford them. When a peacock arrived at a Roman villa, it was an event in itself. Its bright plumage dazzled the guests, and the anticipation of tasting it added to the excitement. The very sight of the bird inspired quiet admiration and curiosity, a soft hum of conversation filling the hall. Preparation of the brains required great care. Cooks removed the brain gently, ensuring it remained intact, soft, and delicate. Seasoned with honey, wine, and subtle herbs, the small portion became a luxurious bite. Sometimes it was boiled slowly to preserve texture. Other times it was baked lightly. The texture was creamy, almost melting on the tongue, while the flavor was subtle yet rich. For a guest, each morsel was more about mindful tasting than about filling the stomach. At a Roman banquet, peacock brains were served in small, careful portions. It was a dish meant to be savored slowly, allowing the diner to notice texture, aroma, and flavor. Plates might be arranged with soft herbs or even small garnishes to enhance visual appeal. Wine accompanied the taste, complementing and accentuating the delicate richness. The experience was gentle, immersive, and surprisingly calming, despite the strangeness of the food. The dish symbolized status and sophistication. To eat peacock brains was to show wealth, connections, and daring taste. It spoke of a host's ability to acquire rare foods and employ skilled cooks. The very rarity of the dish sparked conversation and curiosity among guests. In the soft glow of oil lamps, the brain became a focal point, both unusual and refined. Historical writers mention the popularity of such exotic foods. Pliny the Elder, for example, noted the fascination with peacocks and their use in banquets. He described their bright feathers and rare status, as well as the delicacy of the brain. Such writings allow us to imagine the excitement and care surrounding these meals. The dishes were as much cultural statements as culinary experiences. Preparation was meticulous. Cooks ensured the brains retained their creamy texture, seasoning them with care. Herbs like coriander, lovage, and rue enhanced aroma and flavor. A touch of honey or a splash of wine balanced richness, making each bite smooth and gentle. Every step reflected the Roman love for subtlety and presentation, turning an unusual ingredient into a piece of art. In the dining hall, presentation added to the allure. Small silver dishes displayed the brains like treasures, glistening softly under lamplight. Guests reclined, soft conversation floating in the air, music playing lightly in the background. Each bite was slow, deliberate, and calming, a quiet luxury amid more robust dishes. Even the most curious or skeptical guest might be drawn in by texture and aroma alone. Peacock brains reflect Roman fascination with the unusual. They show a culture that valued rarity, creativity, and surprise. Even parts of animals that might seem odd or undesirable were transformed into delicacies. The effort and skill required turned strangeness into elegance. It was a testament to refinement, curiosity, and gentle artistry in Roman dining. Imagine the villa quietly at dusk. Cooks move softly, chopping herbs, stirring wine and honey, handling each brain with care. Guests recline on cushions, the flicker of lamps creating gentle shadows. Small dishes of creamy peacock brains rest before them, inviting quiet curiosity. The aroma of herbs mingles with faint sweetness, the texture soft and smooth, the taste gentle yet distinct. Even the market scenes added to the story. Exotic birds, feathers gleaming, were displayed carefully for wealthy buyers. Merchants described their origins, their rarity, and the best ways to prepare them. For the Romans, acquiring such foods was part of the pleasure, the anticipation as much as the meal itself. The gentle excitement of the market, the delicate preparation, and the calm presentation combined to make the dish unforgettable. As you drift gently, imagine the quiet villa, the soft glow of lamps, the muted music, the scent of herbs and honey, bowls of delicate peacock brains shimmering gently on silver trays, guests tasting slowly, appreciating flavor and texture. Conversation soft and calm. Even the strangeness becomes serene, a quiet story of wealth, taste, and creativity. Section 13. Parrotfish liver, a rare Roman delicacy. Among the many unusual foods enjoyed by the Romans, parrotfish liver stands out for its rarity and flavor. Parrotfish, with their bright colors and unusual shape, were considered exotic treasures from the sea. Their livers, rich and soft, were especially prized by Roman gourmets. Eating them was a quiet indulgence, a way to enjoy a delicate and surprising taste from the ocean. These fish were usually caught near the coasts of the Mediterranean. Fishermen carefully collected them, noting their vivid scales and firm flesh. The liver was removed with care, cleaned gently, and prepared for the banquet table. It was often cooked slowly in olive oil, sometimes mixed with honey, wine, or aromatic herbs. The result was a creamy, subtly flavored dish that fascinated the palate. Romans prized texture as much as taste. The liver was soft, almost buttery, yet slightly firm, a smoothness that contrasted with other seafood. Herbs such as coriander, rue, and lovage added gentle aroma. A touch of garum or wine could balance the flavors, producing a dish both delicate and memorable. It was small portions, served slowly, that allowed the diner to fully appreciate the taste. Parrotfish liver was not a common food. It was reserved for wealthy households and special banquets. Its rarity added to the allure, making the meal feel ceremonial and refined. Guests often watched its preparation with interest, noting the care required to preserve flavor and texture. Every bite was a subtle exploration, a soft, calming adventure for the senses. The dish also reflected Roman values around luxury and creativity. Food was not only about filling the stomach, it was about demonstrating skill, wealth, and imagination. The transformation of a simple organ into a delicate dish showed ingenuity and mastery. Serving parrotfish liver invited conversation, curiosity, and admiration. It was both food and story, a gentle symbol of sophistication. Preparation required patience. The liver had to be cleaned without breaking, seasoned carefully, and cooked slowly. Olive oil added richness, while wine or honey softened and enhanced the flavor. Cooks might also use subtle herbs to add fragrance without overpowering the delicate taste. The goal was always a smooth, tender result that would delight but not overwhelm the senses. In Roman villas, the presentation was as important as the taste. Small, shallow dishes held the liver, sometimes garnished with herbs or flower petals. Guests reclined on couches, oil lamps casting a warm glow, conversation soft and calm. The subtle aroma of herbs, wine, and cooking fish filled the room. Each bite was gentle, slow, and satisfying, a quiet pleasure in a world of grand feasts. Markets provided the raw ingredients, but not everyone could access them. Only skilled cooks and wealthy patrons could acquire parrotfish and prepare their livers properly. Freshness was essential. The liver had to be firm, clean, and carefully handled. The preparation and acquisition made the dish even more prestigious. It was a food that celebrated effort, rarity, and subtle refinement. Eating parrotfish liver also offered sensory contrast. Its creamy texture differed from firmer fish or roasted meats. Its delicate flavor offered a pause between stronger courses. Guests could savor it slowly, enjoying the gentle taste and the calming rhythm of the meal. In this way, even the strangest foods became part of a serene and measured experience. The dish also symbolized Roman curiosity and appreciation of nature. By exploring unusual parts of rare fish, Romans demonstrated both knowledge and daring taste. Even the smallest morsel reflected ingenuity and elegance. The liver became more than food. It was a statement of sophistication and a celebration of subtle flavor. It showed that even in strangeness, there was artistry, patience, and gentle delight. Imagine the villa at dusk, soft lamps glowing, the faint scent of herbs and oil in the air. Cooks move carefully, seasoning and arranging the livers in small silver dishes. Guests recline, sipping wine, their conversation muted, listening to the quiet rhythm of the feast. A small spoon lifts a piece of liver, creamy and delicate, melting gently on the tongue. The flavor is soft, aromatic, and slightly sweet, calm and satisfying in its subtlety. Even centuries later, parrotfish liver fascinates us. It represents a culture that embraced novelty, creativity, and refinement. It shows how the Romans transformed rare ingredients into something both edible and elegant. The experience was gentle, immersive, and quietly memorable, a perfect example of their unique culinary world. And in imagining it, we feel a sense of calm curiosity drifting slowly through a Roman evening. Section 14. Stuffed dormice, a tiny Roman treat. Among the strangest Roman foods, Stuffed dormice are particularly memorable. Small rodents, usually living in the countryside or in special clay jars, became delicacies for wealthy Romans. Their use in cooking shows both Roman ingenuity and curiosity about unusual flavors. To modern eyes, it may seem strange, yet for the Romans, it was a refined and sought-after dish. Dormice were raised in special enclosures called gleraria. These small pens allowed Romans to keep and fatten the animals, ensuring they were plump and tender. The care taken in raising them was part of the luxury. The dormice were fed carefully, sometimes with nuts, grains, or even sweet pastes to improve flavor. The process took time and attention, creating small, delicate morsels that were highly prized. Preparation was meticulous. The dormice were cleaned and often stuffed with a mixture of minced meat, herbs, nuts, and spices. Some recipes suggest honey, pine nuts, pepper, or savory herbs like lovage and coriander. The tiny creatures were then roasted or baked slowly, ensuring tenderness and even flavor. The result was a rich, compact dish, full of subtle aromas and delicate textures. Serving stuffed dormice was as much about presentation as taste. They were placed carefully on platters, sometimes garnished with leaves or small fruits. Guests admired the effort and skill, recognizing the rarity of the dish. Each dormice was small, encouraging slow, mindful eating, a tiny indulgence within a larger banquet. The aroma of roasting meat, herbs, and spices created a gentle, inviting atmosphere. The dish also reflected Roman values of novelty and status. Wealthy households could afford both the animals and the labor-intensive preparation. Displaying them at a feast demonstrated sophistication, patience, and an adventurous palate. Guests would marvel at the preparation, tasting slowly and appreciating each layer of flavor. It was a quiet indulgence, a moment of calm fascination amidst more robust dishes. The flavor was delicate yet complex. The stuffing added richness and aromatic depth, complementing the tender meat of the dormouse. Hints of honey or pine nuts provided soft sweetness, while herbs added fragrance. The roasting process enhanced the natural flavor, producing a subtle, savory experience. A small bite could linger gently on the tongue, surprising and pleasing the senses. Markets supplied the ingredients, but few could manage the full preparation themselves. Dormice were raised in special pens or acquired from breeders. Herbs, nuts, and spices were often imported, adding to the rarity and prestige. Cooks required knowledge and patience to produce perfect results. The dish was not casual. It was a deliberate and refined culinary experience. Even the ritual of serving contributed to its appeal. Guests reclined on couches, oil lamps glowing softly, conversation quiet and relaxed. Platters were brought with care, each dormice placed thoughtfully. The visual appeal, combined with the subtle aromas, created a calming, immersive dining experience. It was a moment to savor quietly, reflecting the sophistication and creativity of Roman cuisine. Stuffed dormice also reveal Roman attitudes toward animals and taste. Romans used nearly every part of domestic and wild animals, experimenting with flavors and textures. What may seem unusual to us was considered refined, luxurious, and even clever. Every course in a banquet had a purpose, contributing to the rhythm of taste and social interaction. Dormice added a gentle surprise, a delicate pause in the feast. Imagine a villa at twilight, the warm glow of oil lamps, and the soft aroma of roasting herbs. Cooks move carefully, preparing the tiny dormice with herbs, honey, and nuts. Guests recline, sipping wine, murmuring softly, observing the care in each preparation. Platters arrive, each dormice a tiny treasure, golden and aromatic. A slow bite reveals richness, softness, and gentle flavor, inviting calm reflection. Even centuries later, stuffed dormice fascinate historians and food enthusiasts. They show how Romans transformed small, humble creatures into a luxurious, delicate dish. The careful preparation, subtle seasoning, and small size created a dish both unusual and soothing. It was a gentle celebration of curiosity, creativity, and careful craftsmanship. As you imagine the scene, the quiet villa, the aroma, and the tiny feast, you can feel a gentle sense of calm and wonder. Section 15, Flamingo Tongues, Rome's exotic finale. Among the strangest and most luxurious foods of ancient Rome, flamingo tongues were considered the pinnacle of exotic dining. Flamingos, with their bright pink feathers and long, graceful necks, were admired as living spectacles. To taste their tongues was a rare honor, reserved for the wealthiest and most refined banquets. The Romans valued them for their rarity, delicate texture, and subtle, unusual flavor. Even the idea of such a dish evoked curiosity and admiration among guests. Flamingos were imported from distant regions, often from North Africa or Southern Europe. Merchants carefully captured and transported them, ensuring the birds remained intact for presentation. The rarity and expense of acquiring flamingos made them highly prestigious. To host a feast with flamingo tongues signaled great wealth, influence, and daring taste. Guests would be both amazed and intrigued, observing the careful preparation with quiet attention. Preparation was meticulous. Cooks carefully removed the tongues, cleaning and seasoning them with wine, honey, and aromatic herbs. Some recipes suggest subtle additions of pepper, coriander, or rue, enhancing flavor without overpowering the delicate meat. The tongues were often boiled or roasted slowly, producing a tender, smooth, and slightly rich consistency. Even the smallest portion reflected immense effort and care. Serving flamingo tongues was a ceremonial act. They were presented on silver dishes, sometimes garnished with leaves or tiny fruits. Guests reclined on couches, oil lamps casting soft, flickering light across the dining hall. The aroma of herbs, wine, and cooked meat filled the air gently, enhancing anticipation. Each bite was slow, deliberate, and calm, a small indulgence in a grand feast. The flavor was subtle and delicate, yet memorable, smooth and tender. The tongue offered a unique taste unlike any other meat. Wine enhanced the flavor, while honey or herbs provided balance. The dish invited careful, mindful eating, encouraging guests to savor texture and aroma. It was a quiet pleasure, a gentle surprise in the midst of a lavish banquet. Flamingo tongues symbolized prestige and sophistication. They demonstrated a host's ability to acquire rare foods and employ skilled cooks. They sparked conversation, admiration, and curiosity, serving as both meal and entertainment. In Roman culture, food was a reflection of status, creativity, and knowledge. Exotic ingredients like flamingo tongues exemplified this perfectly. Markets and ports played an essential role in this culinary world. Merchants transported flamingos with great care, ensuring their feathers and bodies remained intact. The livers, meat, and tongues were considered valuable. often reserved for the most important guests. Acquiring such rare ingredients required wealth, connections, and patience. The journey from distant shores to the Roman villa added to the allure of the final dish. The sensory experience extended beyond taste. Guests observed the carefully arranged dishes, admired the delicate aroma, and listened to the soft hum of conversation. The slow, deliberate pacing of the banquet allowed for full appreciation. The smooth texture of the tongue, the gentle sweetness from honey, and the subtle aroma of herbs combined for a calming effect. Even the most unusual food became soothing when served with care and mindfulness. Flamingo tongues also reveal Roman creativity and daring. Romans experimented with flavors, textures, and exotic ingredients. Even the most unusual parts of rare animals were transformed into delicate, refined dishes. The preparation required skill, patience, and imagination, qualities admired in Roman society. The result was not only food but art, a quiet celebration of refinement and curiosity. Imagine the villa at night. The warm glow of oil lamps, soft conversation, and gentle music create a serene atmosphere. Cooks carefully season and place the tongues on small, polished dishes. Guests recline on couches, sipping wine, observing the careful presentation. Each bite is tender, aromatic, and subtly sweet, a gentle taste of an extraordinary world. Even today, the idea of flamingo tongues fascinates historians and food enthusiasts. It represents a culture that celebrated rarity, elegance, and culinary creativity. A dish that might seem strange to us was once a symbol of refinement and luxury. The careful preparation, subtle seasoning, and quiet presentation make it a perfect example of Roman sophistication. As you imagine the villa, the feast, and the delicate tongues, the scene evokes calm, curiosity, and gentle wonder. And now, our journey through the strange and fascinating foods of ancient Rome comes to a close. You have wandered through bustling markets, quiet villas, and lavish banquet halls. You have imagined exotic birds, tiny dormice, and the delicate flavors of rare and unusual dishes. The aromas, textures, and soft candlelight of Roman feasts have filled your mind gently. Take a slow, deep breath, letting your thoughts drift with the calm rhythm of the evening. Picture the soft glow of oil lamps, the gentle hum of conversation, and the subtle scents of herbs and honey. Each dish we explored, from peacock brains to flamingo tongues, now rests quietly in your imagination. Let the strangeness and novelty become gentle curiosity, a calm story drifting softly through your mind. Allow yourself to relax further, feeling the comfort of calmness and quiet reflection. The ancient world, with all its unusual flavors and delicate dishes, fades into peaceful memory. Your body feels lighter, your mind slower, and your thoughts softer. Every breath you take invites relaxation. Every gentle image guides you toward calm. Soon, your eyes may feel heavy, your mind wandering softly toward dreams. You have explored Rome's most curious banquets, experienced flavors you may never taste, and yet, in your imagination, every texture, aroma, and gentle surprise remains vivid and serene. Now, it is time to let go completely, allowing sleep to take you. Let the soft echoes of Roman feasts fade into the quiet night. Rest in calmness, curiosity, and gentle wonder. May your dreams be peaceful, your mind serene, and your sleep deep and restorative. Good night.